No one noticed Darius Bennett, not even when he was cleaning up after their $120,000 a year failures. He moved quietly through the 40th floor of Quantum Pulse Mobility's glass tower mop bucket in one hand, clipboard in the other. The office air smelled like ambition and almond milk lattes. Sleek desks framed patents, standing monitors, the kind of place where suits talked about disruption, while stepping over the people holding the building together. Darius knew the routine. He showed up just after 6 p.m., long after the day shift left their half-eaten protein bars and energy drink cans scattered across mahogany conference tables. He emptied trash bins full of rejected code printouts and espresso pods, wiped fingerprints from $1,000 whiteboards, and polished marble floors that would gleam by sunrise. He was officially a technical support consultant, a title assigned by the third-party agency that got him the job. Unofficially, he was the janitor. Everyone called him maintenance, sometimes tech guy when they needed printer paper. He didn't mind the work. What he minded was being erased, not ignored, exactly erased, like he was part of the furniture. People would carry on entire conversations in front of him about things no one should overhear: layoff lists, secret contracts, personal affairs. Nobody lowered their voice when Darius walked by. That morning he'd arrived early to swap out a malfunctioning sensor in the executive conference room. As he bent over the smart thermostat panel, a voice rang out from the far end of the room, sharp-clipped and as cold as the floor beneath his knees. "A janitor thinks he can fix this." He turned and saw her. Sloan Whitaker, CEO of Quantum Pulse, stood at the head of the table in a white power suit, arms crossed, diamond watch glinting under the overhead LEDs. Her gaze burned with disbelief and something else disgust. The object of her fury was a machine that looked like something out of a sci-fi film, chrome-plated compact covered in fiber-optic cabling and diagnostic lights. It sat dead and silent in the center of the table like a monument to failure. "Fix this engine," she said, walking toward him with slow, deliberate clicks of her Louboutin heels, "and I'll promote you. Right here, right now." The room full of engineers, VPs, and board advisors chuckled uncomfortably. Sloan stopped inches from him. Darius could smell her perfume, something expensive and harsh like roses grown under pressure. "But when you fail, and you will, you're gone. Fired. Permanently." Darius said nothing. He looked at the machine, then at her, then he nodded and returned to adjusting the thermostat. 20 minutes later, she'd forgotten he existed. But Darius didn't forget. He never did. That night, as he mopped around the machine again, Sloan had stormed out, mid-meeting the engineers trailing behind her like dogs. After a whistle, he paused and knelt down. No gloves, just bare, calloused hands placed gently against the metal shell. It was still warm. He listened, and for the first time the engine spoke. Not in words, of course, in vibration, in temperature gradients, in residue on the casing barely visible to the eye. It was struggling, running hard, trying to compensate. There was a rhythm to it like an orchestra playing out of tune. He had heard this kind of pain before, long ago, in a very different place. Back in 1995, a boy stood in a Detroit garage watching his grandfather coax a dead engine back to life. Ezekiel Zeke Bennett didn't believe in throwing things away. He believed in listening. "Engines don't lie. D," he'd say, his deep voice rumbling over the sound of Motown on the radio. "They'll tell you what's wrong. You just gotta shut up and pay attention." Darius had spent his summers learning the language of machines, not from textbooks, from instinct, from smell, from sound, from the way a bolt refused to turn or a belt whined at the wrong tension. Zeke taught him more in 3 months than most professors could in a year. Those lessons stuck, long after Zeke passed, long after Darius gave up his dream of finishing university, long after he traded blueprints for cleaning rags. But the knowledge never left. Now standing in a glass skyscraper instead of a Detroit garage, Darius closed his eyes and whispered, "You're trying to talk, aren't you?" The engine didn't answer, but it didn't need to. He'd already heard enough. The next morning, Darius arrived early. The same engineers who'd laughed the day before sat hunched over their laptops, scrolling through diagnostics like gamblers staring at busted hands. The conference room reeked of stale coffee and failure. The machine still refused to run. Every time it started, it shut down at exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds, displaying the same error code, harmonic disruption, detected. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody but Darius. He spent his lunch break rereading the engine specs that someone had left open on a side table. German manufacturing tolerances, American software parameters. There it was, again, like trying to tune a violin with piano sheet music. And suddenly, it clicked. That afternoon, while replacing air filters outside the conference room, Darius heard his name. Bennett Sloan was saying loud enough for everyone to hear. Still haven't figured out what exactly he does here. Maybe we can start trimming some dead weight. There were a few chuckles, a few uncomfortable silences. Darius kept changing the filter. Later, as he walked past the break room, he caught whispers, his name followed by words like diversity, higher quota charity. It didn't sting anymore. Not like it used to. Now it just confirmed what he already knew. They weren't listening, but the engine was, and it needed help. That night, Darius stayed an extra hour. He told security he had extra duties, and they let him be. The building emptied out. The lights dimmed. Silence returned. He approached the engine again, placed his hand on it. And this time it didn't just talk, it screamed. Screamed about mismatched systems, about engineers solving the wrong problem, about elegance lost in translation. He didn't have the full answer, but he had enough to start. Darius pulled out a small notepad from his back pocket, the same one he'd used for years to jot down engine specs, torque values, and grocery lists. He flipped past pages of doodles and formulas until he reached a blank one. Metric versus imperial. He whispered to himself, scribbling notes. He drew a diagram of a crankshaft and overlaid it with tolerance ranges. It didn't take a PhD. To see what was happening, it just took someone who cared enough to look. American calibration software expecting imperial specs. German parts machined to metric precision. It wasn't that the machine was broken. It was confused, trying to operate between two realities. He grinned faintly. Grandpa Zeke would have loved that one. Engines speak in two different languages, he muttered. No wonder it's stuttering. That realization lit a fire in him he hadn't felt in years. It was the same warmth he used to get under the hood of a 1989 Crown Vic or the hum of a carburetor finally tuned right. It was clarity, and it made him dangerous. Thursday morning came too fast. Darius was barely through his second cup of gas station coffee when word spread through the building. The German investors had arrived. 3 black sedans lined up outside the Quantum Pulse lobby like something out of a spy movie. Out stepped Wilhelm Schaefer and his entourage, cold eyes, tailored suits, and 100 million euros of possibility. Inside, the company was buzzing, last-minute rehearsals, polished shoes squeaking down the halls, interns clutching tablets like life vests. Sloan was in full command mode, snapping orders, pacing like a general in heels. But the stress showed. Her makeup was uneven, her voice cracked. And when she caught sight of Darius pushing a mop cart past the main conference room, her expression curled into a smirk. "Mr. Bennett," she said loudly, stopping the hallway. He paused. "Still enjoying your technical consultancy?" Darius held her gaze. "I enjoy listening. It's underrated." Sloane's smile tightened. "Well, perhaps you'll enjoy this afternoon's company-wide meeting. Attendance is mandatory, even for the maintenance team." And just like that, he knew something was coming. By 2 p.m., the main auditorium was packed. Engineers, admins, marketing, security. Everyone had been called in. Even people from other floors. Word had spread fast, the Germans were watching. And Sloan was staging a show. Darius stood in the back near the emergency exit. He liked having space. Sloan took the stage like a Broadway villain. Perfect posture, fire in her voice. "We are at a crossroads," she began. "Our greatest innovation is on the brink of failure. Our engine, our future remains non-operational. But today, we're trying something unorthodox." She turned to the crowd with a sly grin. "Our very own maintenance consultant believes he's found the solution." A murmur swept through the room. Heads turned. Eyes landed on Darius like lasers. Sloan raised an arm, gesturing toward him. "Come on up, Mr. Bennett. Let's give you a chance to shine." It wasn't a challenge, it was an execution. But Darius didn't blink. He walked calmly toward the stage. Every step echoed in the silent room. Phones were already out, cameras rolling, people leaning forward like they were watching a courtroom drama. Sloan leaned into the microphone. "Fix the engine in 2 hours, in front of everyone. If you succeed, you get your promotion. If you fail, well, let's just say you'll need a new mop." There were a few chuckles, but they died quickly, because standing at the center of that stage wasn't a janitor. It was an engineer, and Carmen Hale knew it. She stood from her front row seat, smooth as a wave, and raised her voice. "I'll serve as witness," she said. "Neutral oversight, to ensure fairness." Sloane's smile cracked just a little, but she nodded. "Of course, let's be fair." Wilhelm Schaefer simply adjusted his tie and stared at Darius, like a man evaluating a machine part, quiet calculating. Dr. Hale stepped up beside Darius and leaned close. "You sure you're ready for this?" He nodded. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been listening for days. It's time someone heard the engine." She nodded back. "Then let's begin." And just like that, the timer started. The janitor placed his hands on the machine, closed his eyes, and the world fell silent. The boardroom was empty again, just like Darius liked it. It was 10:47 p.m. The smart lights had dimmed into a gentle evening glow, casting long shadows across the glass table where the engine sat like a sleeping beast. Most folks had gone home hours ago, except for the occasional intern still trying to impress someone or a security guard sipping cold coffee at the front desk. Darius stood by the window, holding a folded printout in his hand, blueprints of the AI engine's internal structure left behind by someone in the engineering team. He hadn't stolen them. They'd been tossed aside, discarded like the janitor who now traced them with careful fingers. He walked slowly back to the engine, glancing down at the blueprint, then up at the machine. His lips moved silently as he did the conversions in his head, inches to millimeters, torque specs to Newton meters. It wasn't just about parts. It was about rhythm. Something felt off. He could sense it like a pianist noticing a sour note in a chord. The AI was reading data in one language while the machine responded in another, like two professionals trying to tango to different tempos. And that rhythm, that tension, it reminded him of a summer long ago. It was 1995 and Detroit was in decline, but Grandpa Zeke's garage on the east side still smelled like motor oil rubber and old jazz records. The kind of place that felt lived in, not just worked in. Darius was 12, small for his age, quiet like now. He didn't talk much, but he listened better than most adults. That morning a red Mustang had been towed into the shop. The engine was pronounced dead by 3 other mechanics, but Zeke just chuckled as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Ain't no such thing as dead," he'd said, "only misunderstood." Darius watched from behind the workbench, chewing on sunflower seeds as his grandfather laid a hand on the warm hood like he was checking for a heartbeat. "Come feel this," Zeke had called, not even looking back. The boy approached slowly. Zeke grabbed his small hand and pressed it to the engine block. It was subtle, just a gentle thrum beneath his fingers, like the pulse of something alive. "You feel that?" Zeke asked. Darius nodded. "That's rhythm. That's timing. That's 4 cylinders talking to each other." He walked over to the shelf, grabbed an old stethoscope, and handed it to Darius. "Now listen, not with your ears, with your gut." The old man taught him everything: how to spot wear just by the color of oil, how to tell a cracked head gasket by the smell of exhaust, how every knock, ping, and whistle meant something. Darius soaked it all in, not because he had to, because it felt like home. "Engines don't care about your skin color or your diploma," Zeke used to say. "They only care if you listen right." The memory faded as Darius traced his finger along the printed specs again. The German engineers had built this thing with surgical precision, 87.63 mm on the crankshaft. But the AI calibration assumed 3.450 inches, which wasn't quite the same no matter how many people said it should be. The result? Microscopic misfires, just enough to throw the whole system into a death spiral every 14 minutes and 37 seconds. He scratched a note onto the blueprint: harmonic mismatch equals tolerance plus frequency error. He smiled. They were chasing ghosts in the software. The problem was in the soul. Back in his tiny studio apartment that night, Darius stood at his bookshelf, which was really just 2 milk crates stacked on top of each other. It held more than books, it held pieces of his life. Technical manuals, MIT course PDFs, engineering magazines, a well-worn copy of The Art of Engine Tuning, his framed associate degree from Detroit Community College, and right in the center, a black and white photo of Zeke standing in front of the garage, arms folded, grease on his cheek, pride in his eyes. Darius sat on the edge of his bed, the blueprint in his lap, and thought about the path he didn't take. He'd been accepted to a 4-year university. Letters from Michigan State Ohio Tech, even a recruiter from Georgia Tech who told him his mechanical intuition was scary good. But all that faded the day his mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. She needed chemo. He needed to work. Zeke had passed 2 years earlier, and there was no one else. Darius took 3 jobs, worked nights at a gas station, spent weekends at a junkyard helping part out salvage cars, and early mornings like these cleaning floors for a company that didn't know his name. He didn't regret it, not really. But sometimes when the lights were off and the city slept, he wondered. At Quantum Pulse the next morning brought a different kind of tension. The German investors were touring the labs, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. Dr. Carmen Hale walked beside them answering questions in fluent German. Engineers scrambled to look busy. Darius passed unnoticed again, wheeling his cart down the hallway like always. But this time he wasn't cleaning. He was watching, listening, preparing. When he reached the engine room, he paused outside the glass door. Inside, he could see Ethan Vaughn and his team staring at their screens like gamblers waiting on a miracle. Sloan walked in behind them, all business barking out time frames and dollar signs. 24 hours, people, she snapped, or we lose the deal. She spotted Darius through the glass and gave him the kind of look you give a smudge on a mirror. He didn't flinch. He knew something she didn't. And tomorrow the whole company would find out. The next evening, Darius arrived even earlier than usual. The building was still half full with engineers pacing, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. The hum of anxiety vibrated through the walls. He made his way to the executive floor, quietly bypassing the cleaning schedule posted near the stairwell. He didn't need permission tonight. What he needed was time and silence. The boardroom lights were off, but moonlight poured in through the massive windows, casting long silver lines across the floor. The engine sat there in the center, quiet again. Not dead, just waiting. Darius pulled out a small tool roll from under his cart, nothing fancy. A flashlight, an analog caliper, and a small harmonic tester he'd assembled from spare parts. Nothing digital, nothing flashy, just old-school mechanic's instinct. He crouched next to the engine and gently rotated one of the exposed pulleys. It resisted, but not much. The play was smooth, almost too smooth. He placed the tester against the housing and powered it up. The gauge fluttered. There it was. The engine had a voice, a frequency, a vibration, but it wasn't matching the AI's internal rhythm. It was like a gospel choir trying to sing along to techno. Everything was slightly off. Not enough to crash immediately, but enough to guarantee failure within the same window every time. He made notes. At exactly 2,800 RPM, the mismatch hit a resonance point. That's when the overheating begins, he thought. It's not just miscommunication, it's feedback overload. The AI thought it was correcting a problem, but it was actually causing it. He leaned back on his heels and looked at the machine like it was a person needing reassurance. "You're not broken," he whispered. "You're just tired of being misunderstood." He stood slowly, knees cracking, and stretched his arms. A soft chime echoed from his phone and email. He checked it. It was from building admin. Subject maintenance staff reminder. All support staff required to attend tomorrow's all-hands meeting at 2 p.m. sharp. Attendance will be recorded. He stared at it for a long second. It wasn't routine. Sloan was up to something, and she wanted an audience. Darius shut off the tester, rolled up his tools, and turned to leave. But before he stepped through the door, he glanced back at the engine one last time. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a message, and tomorrow the world would hear it. The conference room was already packed when Darius stepped in. Every seat was filled. Standing room only. Engineers, interns, admins, even the cafeteria staff had shown up, some with phones out recording. The air buzzed like an amp turned up too loud. At the front stood Sloane Kingsley in full armor navy power suit, designer heels, and that slicked-back ponytail that always looked like it could cut glass. Her voice rang sharp across the room as she addressed the crowd. "We have a unique opportunity today," she said, eyes flicking to Darius like she was looking at gum stuck to her Louboutin. "Our technical consultant has graciously offered to share his theory about our engine failure." A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, not loud, but enough. Darius stood still at the edge of the crowd, unmoved. His shoulders squared, his eyes calm. Sloane continued, "He believes he's discovered something our engineers missed, so we're going to give him a chance to prove it. Right here, right now." And to ensure fairness, she turned voice sweet like poison. "Dr. Hale will be supervising." Carmen Hale stepped forward without a smile. "Full neutrality," she said, flat as steel, "and full transparency. Let's see what Mr. Bennett has." Sloane clapped her hands twice. 2 security guards rolled in the engine on a gurney platform surrounded by diagnostics equipment, oscilloscopes, multiple laptops and screens already showing real-time code scroll. "This is the same setup used during every failed test," Sloane said. "Unmodified, untouched. You have 2 hours." Then she walked off the platform, heels clicking like a countdown. Darius walked up slowly. He didn't rush, didn't stall either. His hands were steady as he pulled a small case from his maintenance cart. Inside was a harmonics tester, a digital caliper, a few notes. Nothing flashy. He placed both hands on the engine casing, and the room went dead quiet. People shifted, phones steadied. Even the cameras stopped moving. Just Darius and the machine. His eyes closed. He waited, listened, then whispered, "You're still off." He turned to Dr. Hale. "Can I run it for 15? She nodded. "Do what you need." The ignition engaged. The machine hummed to life. Everyone watched the screens. Within 5 minutes, the same familiar readings began to spike. By minute 12, error logs flooded in. Temperature rising. Vibration desync. CPU compensating. At minute 14, the first alarm flashed. "There," Darius said, pointing to the waveform display. "See that ripple? That's not random. That's harmonic misalignment." Sloane laughed from the back. "We've seen that. What's new?" Darius didn't look at her. "Not what you're seeing. Why you're seeing it." He shut the engine down. Silence again. He turned to the crowd, voice steady. "This engine was built in Stuttgart. German tolerances. Everything's exact to the millimeter, but the calibration software. That's Californian, American code using imperial measurements." He walked over to the screen, pulled up a schematic. This crankshaft was machined at 87.63 millimeters. The AI. It thinks it's working with 3.450 inches, which converts to 87.63 millimeters on paper, but not in function, not in rhythm. He tapped the data feed. That difference, that's what's causing harmonic echo. The AI's trying to compensate for problems that don't exist. It's fighting itself, overheating, shutting down. A long beat passed. Then Dr. Hale stepped closer to the machine. "That explains the temperature curve." Darius nodded. "It's like trying to sing in tune with someone playing in a slightly different key. You'll clash eventually. Every time." Murmurs rippled through the engineers. Some leaned in, squinting at the data. One of them, Ashok from Thermal Systems, whispered, "Holy shit." Darius reached into his cart and pulled out a metal disc the size of a donut. "A harmonic damper," he said. "Custom cut. Acts as a buffer. Lets the AI and the engine sync without either side forcing corrections." Sloane scoffed. "You're proposing we fix a multi-million-dollar failure with a $50 part." "No," Darius said. "I'm saying we never had a failure. Just a misunderstanding." He installed the damper in 30 seconds flat. Smooth, practiced hands. "Run it," he said to Dr. Hale. The engine roared to life. Everyone stared. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At minute 15, nothing. No spike. No error. 20 minutes. Vibration held steady. Pressure readings optimal. AI no longer correcting, just flowing. At minute 25, Carmen Hale let out a low whistle. Diagnostics confirm full harmonic sync. A soft sound broke from the back. "Sloan, rerun the test," she barked. "Randomize the RPM band, increase load, add thermal stress." Dr. Hale nodded. "Do it." The engine took every variation thrown at it. 30 minutes, 40, no overheating, no failure, no code errors. Then finally, 56 minutes after ignition. Dr. Hale stepped back. System integrity green across the board, sync achieved. Efficiency clocked at 96.8%. That's 3 points higher than projected peak. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, engineers high-fiving, phones recording, a few even wiping tears. Carmen Hale turned to Darius. "Where'd you learn that?" He smiled. "Detroit, Grandpa's garage." Even the German investors stood up whispering rapid-fire German and nodding. But Darius wasn't looking at them. He turned to Sloan, who was frozen. "I'm no one special," he said. "Just someone who listens. Sometimes that's all an engine needs." Sloan's mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time in her career, she had nothing to say. A stunned silence settled over the room. You could have heard a pin drop if it weren't for the low, steady hum of the engine still purring like a satisfied lion. Sloan finally spoke, but not to Darius. "Turn it off," she snapped at one of the engineers. "We're done here." "No," Dr. Hale said firmly. "We're not." Sloan turned surprised. Carmen's voice had the kind of weight that made CFOs shut up and interns freeze mid-breath. "We just witnessed a complete reversal of a 6-week, multi-million-dollar failure. I don't care what department he works in. This man just saved the company." The German delegation had gathered into a tight knot near the front of the room. One of them, Dieter Schumann, the investment group's technical lead, stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and addressed the room in careful, accented English. "In my country, we call this Meisterleistung, a masterwork." He turned to Darius and bowed slightly. "We are very impressed." Sloan's jaw clenched. Darius just nodded. "Thank you, sir." Carmen was already scribbling notes. "We're going to log every part of this diagnostic. I want a full report sent to R&D, to marketing, to legal, to everyone. And yes, we're going to document who cracked it." More cheers erupted in the back. Some engineers were already uploading the video feed to internal servers. Others were sending clips to coworkers on Slack. A few just stood stunned watching the display screen like they were seeing God. Then came the real turn. Raj Patel, lead AI systems architect, stepped forward from the crowd. He looked straight at Darius, his face serious but respectful. "I owe you an apology," he said. Darius blinked. Raj continued. "When you mentioned harmonics 3 weeks ago during that supply closet run-in, I thought you were just rambling. I dismissed you." He held out his hand. "But you were right. And I was an ass." Darius shook it. "We all miss things when we're tired." Sloan watched this unfold, lips pursed so tight they looked white. But the tide was shifting fast. Ashok, Carmen, Raj, 2 senior software engineers, and even the usually silent German investors all stood around Darius like he was already part of their team. Not the maintenance crew, their team. Then came the first ping. A Slack message popped up on Carmen's phone from an unknown contact at Tesla R&D. We saw the stream. Who is this guy? Another ping. Lucid Motors, HR. Any chance he's available for contract work? Another. Apple Mobility Division. We'd like to schedule a meeting. Carmen's eyebrows lifted. She looked at Darius. "You're about to be real busy." He laughed just once, quiet and short. "I've been busy. Y'all just never looked up." Dr. Hale stepped onto the platform again, voice commanding attention, like a professor shutting down a frat party. "I'm making a formal recommendation to upper management," she said. Effective immediately, Darius Bennett is to be reassigned to the Engineering Diagnostics Unit as a full-time consultant. Salary adjusted accordingly. Sloan's voice was ice. "That's not within your authority. It is when the board calls an emergency session," Carmen replied, pulling out her phone and showing the incoming request. "Looks like the Germans just requested one." Boom! Sloan's face drained of color. That was the moment everyone realized she'd lost control. She'd staged this challenge as a spectacle some theater to humiliate a nobody, but the play had flipped, and now she was the villain in her own company's viral redemption story. More phones pinged, Twitter threads, Reddit forums, YouTube shorts, LinkedIn posts titled things like, "From Janitor to Genius, How Darius Bennett Out-Engineered Silicon Valley." The hashtags exploded, #Harmonic Hero, #Engine Whisperer, #Listen Like Darius. The PR team in the back furiously typed on laptops drafting a statement to spin the moment before the internet could twist it for them. But the story was already writing itself. Darius stood quietly through all of it. He wasn't thinking about titles, or the camera, or Sloane's twitching eye. He was thinking of grease-stained summer days in his uncle's garage, the smell of oil, the clink of tools, and the way his Uncle Zeke used to say, "Listen close, D. You hear that? That engine's talkin'. You just gotta care enough to listen back." His hands, still calloused from mopping and fixing leaky faucets, felt clean for the first time in years. Not physically, spiritually. Dr. Hale walked over. "You changed everything today," she said. "You don't even realize it yet." Darius smiled. "Not everything." She raised a brow. "No," he shook his head. "I still gotta finish mopping the 3rd floor." And with that, he stepped down from the platform, past Sloane, past the German investors, past the phones and lights and whispers, and walked out like he'd just fixed a leaky pipe. Like it was no big deal. But everyone in that room knew it was, and so did he. The morning after the engine miracle felt different. When Darius wheeled in his mop cart, the lobby wasn't as empty as usual. A few people stopped him mid-step, not with suspicion this time, but with respect, even awed greetings. Some whispered, "That's Darius," like he'd just passed through the room and changed the air. He nodded quietly, unassuming as always. By 10 a.m., floor 40 had transformed. The conference room was cleared for a closed-door session. Dr. Carmen Hale, Wilhelm Schaefer, Raj Patel, and a handful of engineers were already clustered sipping coffee in hushed tones. Sloane was absent rumor, where she'd retreated to her private suite to prepare her defense. Darius was summoned downstairs to a small side office. It felt strange being invited in. Usually nobody noticed he existed. The door opened and he found himself standing before Wilhelm Schaefer, dressed in his tailored suit, calm but unmistakably impressed. Carmen stood beside him, pen poised over a thick folder. "Mr. Bennett, please have a seat," said Carmen. He sat on the edge of the leather chair, trying not to knock it over with nerves. Wilhelm spoke first, voice smooth and steady. "We have discussed your work, your solution with our investment committee. They are unanimous." Darius stared at the folder. No image of him there, no blueprints, just shoulder patches and desk clutter. Then Carmen leaned in. "We're prepared to increase our original investment by 20%. Darius blinked slowly. "That's an additional 20 million euros to fund Quantum Pulse's European expansion contingent on one condition." Wilhelm took over. "We would like you to lead the diagnostic engineering initiative for our operations in Europe." Darius shifted uncomfortably. "Me?" Carmen nodded. "Your insight, intuition, and straightforward brilliance. They're exactly what we need." He glanced down at his work boots. "You're a genius," said Raj, popping his head into the room. "You deserve this." Darius swallowed. "I've spent my life fixing things and being ignored," he said quietly. "Now, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Wilhelm said. "Just consider where you want to go next." Carmen covered the folder's contents. "Your details contract there ready when you are. If you'd rather stick with floors and mop buckets, that's fine too. But the offer stands." Silence followed. Darius wasn't thinking about money or fame. He was thinking about the moment that followed. In the quiet garage of his grandfather in Detroit, the hum of a worn engine, a voice that said more in a whisper than most people say with microphones. "Listen," Zeke had said so many years ago, "that's how you fix things." Darius looked up and found Carmen's eyes steady and expectant. He nodded once. "I'll do it. But not for Europe, for the people, for the company. And yes, I'm going to keep mopping." Carmen smiled. Wilhelm nodded approval. Raj punched air, quietly ecstatic. By the time Darius left that room, the building no longer felt hostile. He walked the halls he used to clean with his head down, but now he saw faces lift when he passed. Some nodded. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure how to undo years of pretending he wasn't there. Even Marcus, the MIT team leader, stopped him near the elevator. "I was wrong," Marcus said, extending his hand. "You saw what we missed. Respect." Darius shook it. No grudge, no speech, just a quiet nod. That afternoon, Carmen gave him access to the lab floor, the real one. The floor he used to clean after midnight. Now he entered through the front with a badge that said Engineering Consultant, Advanced Systems. Inside, the same screens that once buzzed with errors now lit up in perfect green. The engine purred in the center of the room like a well-fed lion. Engineers gathered around it like worshippers. Some were recalibrating sensors, others updating specs to match Darius's harmonic dampener solution. Dr. Hale approached holding a clipboard. "I've already scheduled your trip to Munich. They want you on site in 2 weeks." Darius exhaled. Munich. That's wild. "I'll come with you," the first time she smiled, to help translate the corporate jargon. "Appreciate it," he said. "But I speak engine better than German anyway." He turned toward the window. Out in the courtyard, a group of interns gathered near the prototype truck, taking photos beside it like tourists. One of them turned and saw Darius, then pointed. "That's him," she whispered. Darius backed away from the window, uncomfortable. Carmen noticed. "You're not used to being seen, are you?" He shook his head. "You will be," she said. "Get used to it. You earned this." But later that night, back in his apartment, the same one-bedroom space with peeling paint and engine manuals stacked in the corners, he felt grounded. He poured himself a cheap cup of instant coffee, sat at the tiny table by the window, and stared at the city lights. He pulled out his phone. A text blinked from Mom. "Mom heard something crazy happened at work today. You okay?" He stared at the screen, then typed, "Darius, they offered me Europe. Promotion. Big one. Mom, you finally getting what you deserve. I knew you would. Your granddad would have cried ugly tears right about now." Darius smiled. He turned to the wall where his associate's degree hung next to it, an old photo of him and Grandpa Zeke, both covered in grease, laughing beside a busted carburetor. "You were right," Darius whispered. They listened. Then he picked up his notebook. Not a company-issued tablet, not some official tech, just a beat-up paper pad with sketches and formulas he'd written by hand over 3 years of working invisible shifts. He flipped to a page labeled Next Ideas Vibration-Based Diagnostics and started writing. The next morning, the invitation came in an envelope. Darius found it taped to his locker, the same dented steel cabinet where he used to stash his overalls and ramen noodles. Except now his name was engraved on a brass nameplate, Darius Bennett, Senior Engineering Consultant. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a formal invitation to Quantum Pulse's quarterly Vision Gala. Dress code, formal location, Pacific Sky Ballroom, downtown SF, purpose celebrating innovation and the people who make it possible. He chuckled. "People who make it possible," he whispered. "They finally mean me." But a part of him didn't believe it yet. Not entirely. He spent the afternoon walking through the engineering floor again. Where once he'd avoided eye contact, now people greeted him with deference. 2 junior engineers even asked for his signature on a diagram he'd corrected. "You saved our jobs," one of them said. "We'd be job hunting if it weren't for you." He laughed modestly. "I just fixed what needed fixin'," he replied. At lunch, he sat in the cafeteria at a table. Not in the corner, not next to the soda machine. At the center. People gathered around, a few at first, then more. Carmen dropped by, followed by Raj and Sarah from the diagnostics team. Conversations that used to die when he approached now turned toward him. "What's your take on AI to mechanics integration?" Raj asked. Darius thought for a moment. "I think we got so smart we forgot to listen." They nodded. Later, when he returned to his apartment, he opened the closet and stared at his wardrobe, jeans, work boots, a dozen navy blue uniforms, and 1 wrinkled button-up shirt. None of them said gala, so he called the only person who could help. "Hey, Mom?" he asked. 2 hours later, she showed up with a plastic garment bag from Macy's, a wide smile and tears in her eyes. "You're going to need this where you're going," she said. Inside was a charcoal gray suit. Simple, clean, timeless. Grandpa Zeke's old watch was tucked in the pocket, still ticking. "Gonna make us proud all over again," she whispered. The night of the gala arrived like a movie scene. The Pacific Sky Ballroom gleamed with glass chandeliers and soft jazz. Darius walked in quietly, his posture unsure. Dozens of men in tuxedos, women in tailored dresses, media banners, company logos, flashbulbs. He found his name on a table near the front table one. When he sat, everyone looked up, then stood. Applause erupted. Not prompted, not rehearsed. Real. Wilhelm approached with a glass of champagne. "Tonight," he said, "we raise a toast to forgotten brilliance." Dr. Hale stood on stage taking the mic. "We nearly lost something rare, but thanks to this man we remembered talent doesn't always wear the right badge. Sometimes it wears work boots." Laughter, applause. Then she nodded to Darius. "Would you like to say a few words?" He hesitated. The ballroom quieted. Darius stepped to the mic, awkward in his suit, adjusting Grandpa Zeke's watch. "I didn't come here to be seen." He began, voice steady but low. "Most days I just hoped no one would yell at me for mopping too slow." Chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I don't got fancy words. But I got something my granddad used to say. Engines don't lie. People do. And I guess I just kept listening." He paused. "I wasn't supposed to be the one to fix that engine, but I was the one who could hear it." Silence, then a slow rising applause, honest, deep, heartfelt. When he stepped down, Wilhelm leaned in. "You've just rewritten the playbook." Later that night, as the ballroom cleared, Carmen joined him on the rooftop. The city lights flickered below. Darius leaned on the rail hands in pockets. Carmen sipped wine beside him. "Tomorrow you're flying to Germany." He nodded. "I read the docs. Whole team waiting." "Excited?" "More like grounded." She laughed. "Good. Stay that way." Then her tone shifted. "You do know this was never just about the engine, right?" Darius turned. "Then what was it about?" She looked at him gently. "Justice." The first plane out of San Francisco landed in Munich just as dusk painted the sky lavender and gold. For Darius Bennett, stepping off the jetway was like stepping into another world, one louder, prouder, and filled with expectation. He clutched his carry-on eyes, tracking the conference driver, who held a sign, "Mr. Bennett, Quantum Pulse, Germany." The ride to the Autotech Bavaria labs was 4 lanes of gratitude. Darius watched city lights slide past daughters of German engineering humming beneath street lamps, while his mind wandered back to Oakland, to the mop cart that once defined his purpose. He pulled his jacket tighter and thought of his grandfather. He would have said, "Don't get too big for your boots," he murmured. At the labs, the halls smelled of oil linoleum and reverence. Engineers in crisp white coats paused to stare as he entered. They knew who he was. The janitor who fixed the future, some called him. He nodded, unsure how to bridge that distance. Then Carmen Hale slipped in beside him. "She's still on the site visit, but they're lining up Europe-wide teams to meet you," she whispered. "Ready." Darius cleared his throat. "As ready as I've ever been." Inside the main lab, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, his touchstone from California, was waiting, flanked by 2 German chief engineers and a translator. Darius felt like he was getting introduced at church. Darius Bennett Carmen began, is now leading diagnostics and harmonics standardization for our European autonomous vehicle systems. Silence, then nods. A tall engineer with silver hair stepped forward, speaking in halting but clear English. "In Germany, precision matters," he said. "What you did, we are learning from you." Darius nodded back. "I'm listening," he said. They took him on a tour of a prototype engine block nearly identical to the one he'd fixed, but housed in a new class of autonomous delivery truck, sleek, compact, orange and white. It sat on magnetic pads ready for diagnostics. Carmen smiled. "A gift," she whispered. "They built it to work with your dampener model." Darius approached, hesitant. He didn't palm the shining metal block. He leaned in and placed his hand gently. This wasn't troubleshooting. This was communion. Later, in a conference room filled with floor plans, wiring diagrams, and live data on screens, Darius met with executives. They talked numbers, efficiency gains, market entry, licensing. But then came the question from Wilhelm. "How do we instill this value system back in Silicon Valley?" he asked with earnest eyes. Darius thought back to mornings mopping floors, the feeling of being invisible, and the power of listening. He replied quietly, "You don't lead by talking over people. You lead by giving space and ears them." Carmen nodded, her eyes misty. The room leaned in. Meanwhile, back in San Jose, Sloane Whitaker watched the live feed in her office, silent, unmoving. The engine had been fixed. Europe was on board. The board was demanding inclusivity programs. She stood up, heard her staff call her. He let them, but she stayed silent. In that quiet, she understood what she'd lost respect not just from others, but from herself. A week later, in a board meeting, she stood quietly as the board praised Darius, recognized his contribution, and implemented a new policy. All employee ideas evaluated equally, regardless of title or department. She was demoted to strategic advisor, a title that carried no executive weight, but forced introspection. She arrived at Darius's office with a trembling apology delivered in a voice lower than last stand. She asked for mentorship. Darius looked at her with the kindness his grandfather taught him to offer. "Everyone deserves to be heard," he said. "I'll help you if you learn how to listen." 3 months later, Darius stood before a shimmering wall of autonomous delivery trucks in Munich, each running with his harmonic solution. Cameras clicked. Heads bowed. He placed a gloved hand on a truck's portal. He heard nothing but the future. He had fixed more than an engine. Munich's night felt gentle, almost tender, as Darius stepped out of the lab. A light breeze brushed autumn gold leaves along the pavement. Through the window, the campus of Autotech Bavaria glowed with green lawns and shining prototypes. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe without anticipation. Elena Rodriguez met him outside. "You did more than fix a machine," she said quietly. "You reminded a company what dignity looks like." Darius nodded. "That engine, it wasn't just a machine. It was a mirror." She smiled, her voice soft with years of experience. "Yes," she said. "You saw yourself in its failures and its rhythm." The following day, Darius joined the European leadership team in the main conference hall. Lines of executives and engineers had gathered, some he'd met, others just names on slides. Entry into that room had once been unimaginable. Now he stood at the head of the table. A slide displayed his name with a title underneath, Lead Diagnostics Engineer, Quantum Pulse Europe. The air filled with tension and hopes. There were presentations on expansion strategies, discussions on regulatory compliance in EU markets, and talks about partnerships with logistics firms. Then it got personal. One executive cleared his throat and stood. "Mr. Bennett," he began, voice steady, "your arrival has shifted our culture faster than any corporate memo could." They passed around prototypes, trucks retrofitted with Darius's harmonic dampers, each running flawless diagnostics. One by one, engineers approached, some with tears welling in their eyes. "You saved this project," one whispered. "Saved dozens of jobs, and maybe more." Later, in a quiet break room, Darius sat alone with a mug of strong coffee. He stared outside at the lab gardens, stars pinpointing blueprints overhead. Then a knock. Sloane Whitaker entered, carrying meeting notes. Darius looked up. No animosity. "Thank you," she whispered. He sipped his coffee. "We almost lost everything," she said, voice low. "I led that charge. I framed the challenge as public arena theater. I forgot people are real." She paused. "I want to do better. I need to do better." Darius looked at her and offered a small nod. "Step 1. Listen," he said. She closed her eyes. No words needed more. Elsewhere the world took notice. Articles began popping up in global industry magazines, from janitor to chief engineer. The story: the corporate world needed how listening created efficiency. The Darius Bennett Way panelists invited Darius to international engineering conferences. At one such stage in Berlin, crowds sat transfixed as he humbly described his method: start by respecting ignorance before intelligence and let what's broken talk. He presented a slide: what the world reveals when we choose to listen. Behind him, a video loop played Darius placing his hand on the engine, the damper glowing under lights, the error alerts disappearing. When applause rose, he thought of Detroit, of Z's garage. Back in San Jose, changes rippled. Quantum Pulse sent message blasts across all floors, new program launched, every voice, every idea, where suggestions from maintenance staff are heard first. Any anonymous innovation submission taken seriously. Employees across departments talked about listening legacy. Sloan, meanwhile, sat in a training session led by Carmen, talking about humility and leadership and how to make space for unlikely talent. Darius joined from Europe over video call, ringing in with a grin. The engine doesn't care what your title is. It cares what you listen with. He heard laughter from the room, then a personal moment. Darius sat with Mom on a video screen. She was back in Detroit apartment, now cleaned up with fresh paint and that old photo of them together framed again. He wiped tears. "You're living his legacy," she whispered. He nodded quietly. "He's still coaching me through every engine, every person." Mom's voice broke. "You took what he gave you, and you built a world around it." He smiled. By autumn, the Munich facility had become a hub of innovation under Darius's quiet leadership. He saw mechanics and yellow gear engineers adjusting AI logs interns, following his methods of listening diagnostics, a growing legacy. He walked the floor with Elena. "We changed more than machines," she said. "We changed hearts." Darius looked out over the humming truck's lights across glass domes. "I just heard," he whispered, and someone decided to listen too. The Detroit air still smelled like oil and hope. Darius stepped out of the rental car and stood in front of the old brick building on 8 Mile. The garage sign had faded long ago, but the letters were still there, ghosted by sun and time. Washington Auto. Honest work. Every time it had been closed for 20 years. Still it stood. The windows were boarded, weeds crawled through the concrete, and the old chain-link fence sagged. But Darius didn't see decay. He saw legacy. He opened the padlock his uncle had mailed him the key and stepped inside. The dust clung to everything like memory. There was still a tire iron on the workbench, rusted but solid. An old radio, a faded photo of his grandfather Samuel Washington holding baby Darius in one arm and a carburetor in the other. He stood in silence for a while. Then he picked up a broom. 3 months later, Washington Auto reopened not as a repair shop, but as a community engineering academy. WA Workshop for Applied Ingenuity. The new name was stenciled in bold navy blue above the garage doors. Beneath it, a motto in Samuel's handwriting scanned from an old notepad. "Every machine has a soul. Learn its language." Darius taught twice a week, sometimes virtually from Munich, sometimes in person when he could fly back. Kids from the neighborhood came in after school. Most had never touched a wrench. Within weeks, they were building engines from scratch, one bolt at a time. They called him Mr. D. He didn't wear suits, just jeans, boots, and that familiar navy hoodie with grease on the sleeves. One afternoon, a teen named Amari stayed late, struggling with a harmonic balance issue on an old engine. "I think I messed it up," she said, frustrated. Darius knelt beside her. "You didn't mess up. You just haven't heard it clearly yet." She looked confused. He placed her hand on the engine. "Now close your eyes, listen, feel. What's it telling you?" Moments passed, then her eyes widened. "It's vibrating uneven, like it's fighting itself." He smiled. "Exactly." Back in Munich, Darius continued leading advanced diagnostics. But something had shifted. He wasn't chasing status anymore. He was building systems, both human and mechanical, that listened before they responded. Engineers under him were hired from unconventional backgrounds, a former mechanic from Morocco, a Ukrainian refugee with no formal degree, a mother of 3 from Atlanta who learned engine mapping from YouTube and night classes. They worked better than any Ivy League team he'd seen, because they worked like they had something to prove and something to protect. He gave them space, and they gave him miracles. At the Munich Auto Innovation Expo, Darius took the stage to present the new harmonic adaptive engine co-developed by his team. Efficiency 96.8%. Repair cost 40% lower. Average error rate negligible. But his keynote wasn't about specs. It was about belief. "The most advanced thing I ever learned," he told the audience, "was how to shut up and listen to engines, to people, to problems. The rest is just torque and math." Thunderous applause followed, but he just gave a humble nod and walked off stage. That night he flew back to Detroit for something more important. In a small community theater, WA was hosting its first Future Builders graduation ceremony. 12 students aged 15 to 21 received certifications for completing the full engineering mentorship program. They wore jumpsuits instead of gowns. Their families filled the audience. Amari was valedictorian. She gave a short speech. "We didn't come here because we were good at school," she said. "We came here because Mr. D taught us to listen before trying to fix. That changed how we see machines and how we see ourselves." Tears fell from parents' eyes. Samuel Washington would have smiled. Afterward, Darius sat alone at the edge of the old garage, one hand on the railing, one eye on the stars. A light breeze rolled by. The sound of a distant engine hummed past. He closed his eyes, and for just a moment, he heard the heartbeat again, the one that had started it all. 2 weeks after the WA graduation ceremony, Darius received an unexpected email. Subject Reworkshop collaboration request from Victoria.Sterling@globalinnovators.org. He stared at the screen for a full minute. Victoria Sterling. The woman who once bet her ego on his failure, who had snapped her fingers in his face like he was less than human. Now she was requesting a collaboration. He opened the email cautiously. "Dear Mr. Washington, I hope this message finds you well. I've recently joined Global Innovators Foundation as Director of Technical Equity Programs. We focus on supporting underrepresented engineering talent around the world, particularly those overlooked by traditional academic pipelines. Your work with WA has become a case study in our recent diversity initiative. I believe there's potential for partnership between our organizations, perhaps a Detroit pilot program. Would you be open to a conversation? Respectfully, Victoria Sterling." Darius closed his laptop. Then he laughed. Not bitterly, just a small, surprised chuckle. People change, sometimes slowly, sometimes only after crashing into the limits of their own arrogance. But they can change. The meeting took place at a small cafe in downtown Detroit. Victoria arrived 10 minutes early, dressed modestly in a blazer and jeans. No designer heels, no entourage, just a tablet and a notebook. Darius approached the table slowly. "Didn't expect to see the day you'd set foot in 313, he said, offering a hand. She took it. "Didn't expect to be invited." They sat. Coffee was ordered. Silence hovered for a second, then Victoria exhaled deeply. "I owe you more than an email." Darius nodded but said nothing. She continued. "I was wrong. About the engine. About you. About a lot of things. I've spent the last year trying to unlearn habits I thought were leadership. Turns out most were just survival mechanisms." Darius sipped his drink. "You were built by a system that rewarded arrogance. I don't blame you for becoming what it demanded." Victoria blinked. "You're kinder than I was." He shrugged. "Detroit raised me." She smiled faintly. "And it saved me too." The partnership bloomed faster than either expected. Global Innovators funded an expansion new tools scholarships, even international exchanges. Amari spent a semester in Munich presenting on harmonic diagnostics at an engineering conference. Another student, Devante, landed a remote internship with a robotics startup in Kenya. WA became a blueprint. Other cities took notice: Cleveland, Newark, Birmingham. By year's end, Darius had 6 inquiries from different school boards about duplicating the program. And then came the call. It was from Tesla Advanced Systems, the CTO herself. They wanted Darius to lead a global diagnostic initiative standardizing repair protocols across 4 continents, creating sustainable design systems, and mentoring engineers from underserved regions. The offer: $1.7 million salary, stock options, unlimited R&D budget. But the job meant leaving Detroit, leaving WA, leaving the quiet classroom moments where he saw kids like he once was, finally believing they were smart enough. He told the CTO he needed a week. He called Dr. Rodriguez that night. "I thought this would feel like winning," he confessed. Her voice crackled through the line. "Because you already won, mijo. That was last year when the engine finally purred. He smiled. So what now? Now you choose what kind of victory you want to build next. He walked back to the garage. It was almost midnight. Inside, Amari was still working on a prototype, an electric go-kart engine with a harmonic calibration module she'd designed herself. She didn't notice him at first. Then she looked up, grinning. "I think I figured it out," she said, holding up a sensor array. He knelt beside her. "You gonna beat my efficiency record?" She smirked. Already did. The next morning he declined Tesla. Politely, respectfully, but firmly. "Some engines need me here more than they do there," he wrote. 3 years later, WA had grown into a national movement. Not a company, not a brand, a belief. Kids who had never held a wrench were now competing in national robotics contests. High schoolers were filing patents. Community college graduates were starting consulting firms. Every WA campus had the same mural painted near the entrance, a pair of greasy hands holding an engine, and one simple sentence: "Listen first." Darius didn't care about magazine covers, but he ended up on one anyway. Wired's Engineer of the Year. In the photo, he wore his grandfather's old coveralls. Same boots, same calm smile. Underneath the quote read, "I wasn't trying to fix a machine, I was trying to hear it." One rainy Sunday, Darius visited the cemetery alone. He sat by his grandfather's headstone, an umbrella balanced on one knee. "Hey, Gramps," he said softly. "I think I finally understand what you meant. About machines, about people." He placed a small harmonic dampener on the grass. "Turns out sometimes the whole world's just out of sync. All it needs is one good part in the right place." He sat there in the rain for a while longer, listening, always listening. In the end, Darius Washington didn't just fix an engine. He rewired the way people looked at potential, especially when it came from someone they never expected. His journey is a reminder that talent doesn't always wear a lab coat or sit in a corner office. Sometimes it pushes a mop. Sometimes it walks the halls unnoticed. But when given a real chance, it roars like an engine in tune. The Black community has long carried brilliance passed down through experience, not always through institutions. Wisdom taught in garages. Innovation born out of necessity. Darius wasn't an anomaly. He was the product of generations of excellence waiting to be recognized. What the boardroom doubted the streets of Detroit had already seen. What Ivy League dismissed the Black community had been teaching for decades. Listen first, judge last. For every child told they aren't smart enough, for every teen tracked into lower expectations, for every janitor with a mind built for miracles, this story is a mirror. It shows what happens when someone finally believes in them, when someone finally hears them. The transformation didn't stop at Tech Vanguard. Darius turned his success into a bridge bringing opportunity, education, and visibility to the Black community he came from. He proved that representation isn't charity, it's strategy, it's innovation, it's justice. So the next time you see someone whose shoes are worn or whose title sounds unimportant, pause, ask yourself, am I looking at a janitor or a genius still waiting to be heard? Because the truth is, some of the world's best engineers are just waiting for someone to hand them the keys.